Hi guys, welcome back to Creep Designs by Twitch, and as you can tell this day it was raining heavily. In today's video I'm working on a custom piece for a lovely lady. She's after a really classic look for this piece, so I'm really looking forward to seeing if I can pull it off. As always, I am starting by removing anything that's not being kept, and that means getting rid of these knobs. My next step is to give the top a really good clean with cuts and Millie clean cut to remove any grime or anything before I sand the top. I'm not cleaning the whole piece just yet, just the top. I have a lot of sanding to do and I don't want to clean it all and then have to clean sanding dust off it all over again. So I'll clean it first to stop the sander from pushing any grime or gunk into the grain, and then I'll sand it, and then I'll clean the base. So I started off using 80 grit sandpaper on my PrepMate 2 Orbital sander. Because the finish on this desk was so thick, this is going to take me forever to get through. So I decided to see how I'd go with my carbide scraper. I started by scraping off a small section just to see how it would come up, or how easily it would come up. And then once I scraped that section, I grabbed my sander to see if it sanded a lot easier, and it did. Worked a treat. I then got to work scraping the rest of the top. Don't be daunted or intimidated by the idea of using a carbide scraper. They are super simple to use once you get the knack for it. Just practice on something that you're not going to care about if you damage it. And my biggest tip would be to keep the handle somewhat level to the piece. When I first started using the carbide scraper, I assumed that because of how small it is, that it would take forever to do a surface like this. It actually saved me a lot of time, and after scraping it all, I used the 80 grit to clean it up. And I only went through one disc of 80 grit sandpaper and I hung it back up to use later because there was still heaps of grit left on it. So I got my carbide scraper from Total Tools. I couldn't find one at Bunnings that I liked. They have a small one there that looks kind of crappy. So I got this from Total Tools. They didn't have a great range there, but if you have a look on Amazon, they have a lot more options there. Whilst we're at it, I have set up an Amazon wish list because someone did ask me in the comments on my last video if I had one, so I thought, why not? Now that the entire top is all scraped off and dealt with, I'm going back with the 80 grit sandpaper just to knock down anything else that's left on there and get it down to a nice raw finish. After I finish with the 80 grit, I'll move up to 120 grit and then 240 grit. Now I've swapped over to my foam interface pad with 240 grit sandpaper to try and knock back as much of this edge as I can without damaging any of the nice curves that are already on it. It worked a treat on that prominent edge, but it couldn't quite get into that deep crevice. So I swapped over to hand sanding. To get right into that groove as best as I can, I used a dirty paint roller that ended up on the floor ages ago and I just found. And rolled that up in a piece of 120 grit sandpaper. It didn't quite get in there, but it still started it off nicely, and then I just rolled it up like a little cigar. Going back to my carbide scraper again and just using the end of it to try and get into that little groove that everybody hates sanding. Once I've finished removing all of the old finish from around the edges, I will then go in with 120 grit sandpaper and then 240 grit sandpaper, and then I'll go all the way up to 400 grit sandpaper. The reason I use 400 grit sandpaper on the edges and not on the top is because the grain is generally more open on the edges, more so on the ends where there's end grain, but I like to do that all around the edges because they will take in more of the stain than anywhere else. Now I'm just hand sanding the top of it with 240 grit sandpaper so that it gets rid of any swell marks that there might be left in the top from the sander, and just to have it all running the same way. It also helps me get a feel for it and make sure it's all smooth. So now that I've got it all nice and smooth, I'm going to ding it up a little bit with some implements because we're going for a rustic finish on the top of this desk. It already has some dents and dings and scratches and stuff in it, and I didn't want to sand too far down to try and get all of those out because some of them are quite deep. So instead of getting those imperfections out, I'm adding more imperfections to it just to enhance that rustic finish. I didn't record myself cleaning the bottom part of the desk because you've seen it before, and yeah, have this. So now that I've got it all nice and clean, I'm now scuff sanding it. Why clean it before you scuff sand it? Because if you don't, and if it's got grime or grease or oil or anything on there, even oil from your skin, sanding it can push that grime, grease, oil into the grain or the old finish on it, and then there is a chance that your paint won't adhere to it because it will create a resist. I'm just going to add here, if I sound like I'm patronising, I'm not trying to be, it's just that the words are in my head and I know what I need to say, I struggle to get it out properly, and that's when I start talking slower and sound like I'm patronising. So I apologise in advance, and I just thought I would explain. Okay, so now that we're at this point, we've got it all cleaned and scuff sanded and then dusted off. She's ready for paint, and I will show you the inspiration photo. So this is what my client came to me with. She is well aware of the fact that the base of this isn't actually done in a black. It's like a really, really super dark brown stain, but she wants it black, and that is awesome because that is a lot less work for me. And it's got a super rustic top on it, so this is what I'm going to work towards, and hopefully I can achieve it. So I'm using Millie Boutique Mineral Paint in the colour Black Bear. So this stuff is self-leveling, self-sealing, and is water-based, so easy to clean up. It has a matte finish, but you can leave it as is, or you can seal it for a different finish, so a satin finish or a gloss finish. I generally go for a satin finish. I recommend sealing it for high traffic areas, but if you don't want to use a sealer, you can also use boutique furniture wax. I don't think that's what it's actually called, but I'm having a mind blank. So you can use the hemp wax, hemp salve. There we go, I got there. You can use the Millie hemp salve or the Millie hemp oil. Alright, so I'm going to start by painting the underside and any parts that are hard to get to. I'm not concerned about the brush flicking up and over the edge because when I'm done with all of the painting, I will run some sandpaper along this edge to get off any parts that have gone over. As well as painting the underside along here first and starting there, I'm also going to paint the parts that are harder to get to, so the underside of parts, and then I'll move to the outside part. So this is 2 coats completely dried. Alright, look at how sexy that is. I seriously need to paint more pieces in black. I don't know why I don't, it's my favourite colour. So now I'm just doing a little bit of light, very natural looking distressing with some 240 grit sandpaper, just going over anywhere that would naturally get wear and tear, like corners and edges and around the feet and stuff. I've patched up this piece on the back, so I'll have to get moving on the top part while I wait for that to dry. Okay, so after all of that sanding, I decided to start with a black wash to try and dull down the orange tone in it and to make it a bit darker and darken the grains and stuff, and went through a whole process of different stains and sanding and different colouring and all of that kind of stuff to try and get that weathered look. It came out really nice, but I finished it off with, I think it was How Now, the washed away stain, and sanded it, and then went over it with Topcoat to try and get all the layers. And like, there's a couple of photos of how it came up, but I showed my client and it was too dark for her, which I agreed with. It was darker than the inspiration photo, so now I've sanded it back and starting again. Okay, so this is where we're at now. I've sanded it back again. There's still some dark in this groove here. I'm not sanding all of that out again. That will just be part of the finished look, and I think it'll work. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to lighten it first and try and get rid of some of the tannin that's in the pine, and I'm going to do that using bleach. So I've done this before on another piece and it worked perfectly. So I'll show you how I'm going to do it. Okay, so when I'm doing this, rather than just going straight in with bleach by itself, I put some water in the container. I probably shouldn't have used this one, it's got black stuff floating around in it. Oh well, whatevs. And I'm just using regular White King bleach. So I do it this way so that I can do layers of the mix. It won't lighten it as much as if it was just straight bleach, and this way I have a bit more control over how much it gets lightened. And then I can, if it's not light enough once it dries, I can just go back in and do another coat and another coat, however many coats it takes me to get it as light as I want it. So the first time I did this, I used a rag to do it, and it was just a mess because it dripped everywhere, and I ended up with a couple of white blobs. So this time I tried using a sponge. It was okay, but you know, just didn't feel quite right to me. So I did a second coat of bleach once the first one dried, and then after this I decided to swap over to a brush, and brush application was actually heaps better. Okay, so I did a few more coats of this, and it's had overnight to dry completely, but it still looks damp. But what that is the residue from the bleach sitting on top of the surface, the wooden surface. So now I'm neutralising it with a mix of white vinegar and water. here she is, all bleached and neutralized. So there's a little bit of dark spots in it from the black wash that I did, the initial black wash, but that's okay. I should say that's okay. Still working on my coffee, because it'll add to the overall rustic effect that we're going for. So now I'm going in with a grey wash using a mix of Black Bear, Chelsey cream and Charlie Latte. You could also just use a grey that you like, but you know me, I like to overcomplicate things. Now I'm using a dark wash, which is a mix of water, Black Bear, and washed away Hound, just a little bit of the Hound, just to brown it a little bit without making it too brown or too black. Just going to dry it as well with the heat gun so that you can see the difference and how it will dry. It won't dry this dark. So I went in with the second coat of the dark wash, but this time I just did it in kind of stripes and blurred the edges with a dry sponge. Went around the edges too, and here I'm just drying it with the heat gun so that you can see the difference. It just gives it a bit more definition and a bit of difference so that the top of it isn't completely flat. You know what I mean? You get it. It gives it a bit of difference. Now I'm just rolling on my top coat for the top section. I started rolling the edges and then decided to grab a small brush and brushing the edges instead, and then just rolling it all out as I go. I'll do 3 coats on the top, sanding with 400 grit sandpaper in between. Because the boutique mineral paint has a built-in sealer, I only did 2 coats of top coat on the base of the desk, and I mixed some Black Bear into the top coat to make sure it came out nice and smooth and to make sure there was no smokiness or streaks on the black. For some reason, black paint just shows up everything. It's shocking. Yeah. And this is why I'm also, rolling the center of the drawers. So brushing it on and just using a roller to kind of even it out on that flat surface. It's mostly the flat surfaces that show up streaks and strokes and everything. So the handles that I'm using on these drawers, the screws are actually too short, and I was going to countersink the holes from the inside so that the screw head could go into the back of the drawer so that it would come out the other side. You understand what I mean? I can't word right now, it's almost the end of the day. And I thought I was going to be able to do that. But I was having to countersink too far into the drawer, and so that wasn't going to work, and even if it did, the head of the screw was too small and would have just pulled straight through. So what I did was I detached the drawer front and I countersunk the outside of the drawer, as you'll see here, and put a washer onto the screw so that it wouldn't pull through, and that countersinking on the middle part gives the screw head and the washer somewhere to sit inside the drawer, and then reattached it. I hope that all made sense. If it doesn't, just mute me and watch the video, because the video makes sense and I don't. Anyway. Here's a quick reminder of what she looked like before. And here she is, guys, all done and stylish looking. Pretty happy with this. If I find a desk like this for myself, I'll be painting it black. Before I finish up, I'd like to say a huge thank you to Wanda for buying me coffees, for Emma Henry for buying me coffees, and a huge extra special thank you to Angela for buying me coffees. She brought me 40 coffees, guys. I'm not going to tell you why just yet, because I'm waiting for the money to transfer over from the Buy Me a Coffee app, which apparently takes a couple of weeks when you're doing it for the first time. But it will all be revealed, and she is just an absolutely tremendous and kind soul who has just blown me away. But for now, I hope you enjoyed this video. I had a great time working on this piece and I'm super happy with how it turned out. So as always, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Give me a like, don't forget to subscribe and share and do all of that jazz, and see you on the next one.